So this is part A of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast only on the internet from East London in the UK within quotation marks, UK within quotation marks. At 10 minutes past 10 or 10 hours GMT on Tuesday, the 5th of October 2021. Now, we're starting with this print cover of the Fleet Street paper, The Guardian. And it's the Pandora Papers after the Pegasus disclosures 2 months ago. This Pandora Papers Tories under pressure to return donations. Now that is stupid. What's the point? What's the point of the Tories returning donations? What is the point? And although Johnson is pictured in the montage, he's not named in the list. That is Muhammad Amarsi, Viktor Fedotov, or Lubov Charnukin. These are not the real kind of really representative villains, if you like. The really representative villains are in the UK government, and there is a picture of Imran Khan of Pakistan, who calling for change because Imran Khan is not listed as a recipient, but as one of the kind of opponents of corruption in that particular depiction. And on pages 4 and 5, there are, well, The Guardian has got page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. Page 8, page 9. So there are 9 pages of The Guardian. So I have not read the 9 pages, the contents, the copy. But I can say, even without reading that particular copy, collected copy, collectively referred to as the copy instead of copies on the pages 9. No, the 9 pages of The Guardian. I can say contextually on the evidence that I have seen, and I do see elsewhere, that this is collectively and severally, that is, on individual cases and collectively, this is still the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. And I'll say how I say this is tip of the iceberg. Because this shows widespread, open, brazen corruption involving billions of pounds. And although The Guardian says that day 2 of the political fallout scandals hit Tory conference, The Guardian is not telling the whole truth, because the starting from the latest disclosures about access to the British monarchy by crooks and donors, and covering the period of David Sleazeback Cameron, whose corruption and criminality have only been reluctantly admitted following a series of reports that he has been involved in looting and robbing the UK economy or the UK government after formally ceasing to be a member of the government. And it goes back to all other aspects and activities of the UK government, including, of course, the behavior of the so-called couple, Tony Blair and his wife Sherry Booth. So the evidence is there, out there. Evidence is out there and has been there of the UK state, the UK government machine, UK government offices being abused, misused, and used as cover by organized criminals, including the criminals who at the time are incumbent in the positions of prime minister, cabinet minister, etc., etc. And of course, in the case of the Conservatives who received the bulk of the bribe from private sector criminals. So the government, the UK government is not acceptable on the evidence as remotely being honest, let alone remotely being engaged in serving the services, delivering the services that it exists to deliver. And this is the theme. Baby Angel Geronimo editions. Everything that depraved DEFRA has said, everything that depraved DEFRA has been saying, and everything that the congenital liar Boris Johnson has been saying, condoning against the world's most healthy baby, a baby angel Geronimo. Everything has been and is a lie. It's untruthful, untrue, and intended to suppress the truth, deny the truth, and deny justice that baby angel Geronimo is entitled to. So it includes members of parliament, members of the so-called cabinet, fronted by the congenital liar Boris Johnson. And it includes the propaganda operators and operatives, including those criminals operating as Fleet Street journalists. Now, in the tweets that we have posted so far, before starting around 4 hours ago, the Khoodeelaar campaign tweets stated, we meaning the Khoodeelaar campaign, operate lawfully, legally, honestly, at all times. We also assume that all our online actions are accessed by hackers. Get this, all the criminals accessing our online actions that is addressed to the criminals get this meaning. Take a note of this, that we know what you are doing. But we have nothing, absolutely nothing in anything that we publish. Any campaign that we do, there is nothing that can be compromised, neutralized. Why? Because the standard of morality, standard of ethics and accountability, and the standard of transparency that we apply at all times, these standards are high. These standards are high and higher than anything that crooks and criminals, including the criminal, congenital liar Boris Johnson, is ever, and I repeat, ever likely to reach, let alone match, let alone supersede, because they are in the opposite direction to us. We are higher and they're going lower. And this includes all the criminals, also known as the billionaires. All the criminals, also known as the billionaire shareholders and owners of all the online operations. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all of these we consider are owned and controlled by criminals. And we use some of these platforms. With the difference, nothing we have published and posted or asserted ever since we began using these platforms, nothing can be compromised, ethically, morally, evidentially. Now, this is not a minor claim, it is a major claim. Campaigning against crooks and criminals who actually physically control the platforms that we also use is not done lightly. And as the last 24 hours evidence, objective evidence, has confirmed, the various outages within the Facebook and allied organizations only proves the fragility of these big business operatives and owners. Because the panic, the whole outage in the last 24 hours was caused by a deliberate series of actions by Facebook in order to do what? In order to deny what they knew were the revelations by the whistleblower. And they knew what the whistleblower might include in their disclosures, leaks. So Facebook took what they thought was preemptive action to prevent the full extent of the truth being told about Facebook and its corrupt policies, which is what the whistleblowing episode was mainly centered on in the last 24 hours. So Facebook reacted in a way that the whistleblower not necessarily predicted in terms of the reaction, in terms of the nervousness. But by reacting in the way that Facebook has done, Facebook actually added added to the evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the corporate Facebook organization that the whistleblowing episode was about. That instead of prioritizing users of Facebook Corporation abused access to the users' accounts and focused on maximizing profit at the expense of the users. So what we said in our tweet earlier, 4 hours ago, of course, was not said by relating any of what we said to specifically the Facebook organization, but in the last 4 hours, we have been able to access information about the reaction Facebook had shown. And the reaction was, in order to cover up, in order to deny, in order to hide, in order to conceal the very allegations or the evidence of the corruption, big time, multi-billion dollar corruption by Facebook that the whistleblowing episode is about. So what we said in the last 4 hours was not said in that knowledge, but it has been vindicated. So when Facebook is exposed, Facebook is exposed as in being involved in hiding, big time, hiding corruption and abuse of the users' accounts. Rather than serving the users and allowing the users unimpeded, uninterrupted, unexploited use of an access to the accounts. So what we have said about the criminals is vindicated already today by the evidence that has come online after we posted our original condemnation updates. And there is therefore conclusive, definitive proof that the platforms like Facebook and Google and others in the same kind of categories of allowing, if you like, people to use their platforms for personal and other uses, but those users being undermined and abused and misused by Facebook and Google and others to promote, prioritize, that is the term, profit for the companies. And prioritizing profit necessarily includes interfering with, lying about the accounts on these platforms. And one factor that is most certainly not included in the operations of Facebook and Google is the concept of upholding universally understood values and concepts of accountability, of transparency, of democracy, of tolerance, of respect, of compassion. There is no promotion of compassion by Facebook. For example, there are three places, three regions of the world which have been affected by Facebook's malevolent, corrupt, and criminal agenda. One is the United States itself and the whole set of allegations that still remain outstanding against Facebook about allowing lies to be posted and promoted about the American, within quotes, democracy. And the interference in the various countries in Africa. And of course, in the abuse called Cambridge Analytica. The abuse called Cambridge Analytica remains still unaccounted for. But all of these have been connected with, linked to Facebook. Anyone watching the kind of formally published proceedings of the American kind of elected Congress, Senate, etc., will notice that this Mark Zuckerberg uses a very offensive, toxic, poisonous way of addressing people during the proceedings. For example, congresswoman, congressman, or congressperson, as if he, in comparison as a person, not as an intellectual, because he is an operative and he is an operator. He's an operator. He's not an intellectual giant or moral authority. But the way he uses that term, congresswoman, I mean, he appears to think that he is on a higher level, which he is not. Like he is saying to the congresswoman, particularly AOC, the New York congresswoman, Democratic congresswoman, that he is surprised by their lack of knowledge and lack of depth, which is the opposite of the truth. He is the one who is dodging the questions repeatedly. And as far as I know, there is no commentary online, or I have not seen any commentary about Zuckerberg patronizing and insulting the members concerned, who are the ones that are putting questions to him. And there is online and accessible kind of observations about Zuckerberg being allowed too much excuses and evasions by the Congress people generally, not AOC, but by the majority of the Congress so far, majority of the Senate so far. So there is no evidence that any USA government or government agency or department or whatever, or their equivalents in Africa or African countries, their equivalents in Asia and in Asian countries, or their equivalents in Western Europe, has been even put to a process of being held to account by a Facebook or by a Twitter or by any other platforms. All of those, of course, incidentally and very significantly, are platforms that are based in America, and the people who are profiting from those platforms are, of course, all in the USA. So there may be a kind of undisclosed, undeclared policy kind of approach and strategic approach on the part of the USA Congress and the USA presidential administration, for example. The policy to shield, to cover, to protect Facebook, Twitter, and Google from publicly being exposed and being engaged in big time corruption and criminality and looting and subversion of democracy. For example, the attempts by the European Union several times to hold Facebook and Google and Twitter respectively, that is, in succession, not with respect, but in serial kind of attempts to hold them to account, to regulate them. All these attempts have been sabotaged, really. And the attempts or the attempted regulatory oversight regimes have been significantly neutered. And the penalties that would have been effective in, or considerably effective in holding Facebook, Google, and Twitter and others to some account, have been put in place, but not anywhere nearly as effectively as there should be and should have been, and they have been overdue to be being kind of subjected to. So when, for example, the online kind of versions of the depraved, degenerate DEFRA, fronted by the degenerate, depraved, wrongdoing evildoer, George Injustice, when the various activities against baby angel Geronimo over the last 4 years began to be published, the online kind of versions, outlets like the Daily Mail, the Scum, the Star, even the Guardian, the daily bribing Boris Johnson graph, they included completely untruthful, dishonest, and criminally conceived lies against the perfectly healthy baby angel Geronimo. Now that is a kind of extension. That is the kind of copy of the kind of policy that the American government and the American Senate and the American media really, like the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and others, including the big news organizations like the American news organization called AP, and there are kind of counterparts internationally who are allowed to operate from the American sphere, Reuters and the AFP. All of them have been playing collusive, complicit roles to accommodate and to allow the evasions of duties, evasions of moral, constitutional democratic responsibilities to the public by Facebook, by Google, by Twitter, and others. So here, the Daily Mail and the Daily Dirty Digger owned and controlled the sun.co.uk and the Star and others, they have been bending forward backwards to allow the liars at DEFRA, depraved DEFRA, and the congenital liar, Boris Johnson, the say, that got on the record and stays on the record as lying against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. And as I have been saying, we are the organization, we are the campaign that have been telling this truth. Nobody else is doing it. Anyone who doesn't agree with what I have just said and what we have been saying all the time, that we are the world exclusive platform, world exclusive campaign, world exclusive program, carrying out world exclusive diagnosis, dissection of the corruption of Fleet Street. And that does include this otherwise kind of sanguine, the Guardian. The Guardian too is as corrupt as the Daily Mail, the Star, the Scum, the Mirror, and the Financial Crimes, and the I newspaper, so-called. And they daily suppress the truth, the legacy of the poisonous, toxic, poisonous liar, Beaverbrook. That is Beaverbrook. And we include all the leadership, all the incumbents in the post of the leader of the Labour Party at any stage as being complicit with the corruption and the crooks, despite the fact that at one point during the 2011 kind of proceedings called the Levison Inquiry, Gordon Brown issued a series of stunts denying that he had any connection with the Dirty Digger Rupert Murdoch. The evidence is that Gordon Brown was connected with the Murdoch as well. Not maybe necessarily to the extent that the evildoer Tony Blair was. Remember, the Tony Blair, later than after the Levison inquiry ended, I think, was exposed as having had several trysts, sexual encounters with the woman called Wendy Dang, who was, of course, officially married to the Dirty Digger Murdoch at the time. And once the revelations hit the newsstand, if you like, Wendy Dang was divorced by Dirty Digger Murdoch very quickly indeed. Wendy Dang is the woman that physically assaulted one protester during the Levison inquiry. She actually physically pulled him down on the ground just before the man was about to physically hit Dirty Digger Murdoch, was sitting right in front of Wendy Dang. So although Gordon Brown was not as deeply involved with the Dirty Digger Murdoch scum operation, Gordon Brown lied when he denied that he had anything to do with it, because the overwhelming volume of evidence that was presented to the public in the form of the evidence before the Levison inquiry, the overwhelming bulk and the kind of weight showed that Murdoch, through his agent, Rebecca Brooks, was personally kind of able to personally create and maintain a stranglehold over each of the leaders of the government. Blair, Brown, Cameron. So what that showed is that none of the criminality conceived against baby angel Geronimo by the depraved DEFRA would be published. And they have not been published in the last 4 years, during which the depraved DEFRA has been confecting dozens and dozens of absolute pretexts and lies and untruths against the perfectly healthy baby angel Geronimo. Now, the lies against baby angel Geronimo are lies against the universal concept of justice. Because if they could conceive of, if they could dare, if they could imagine that they could lie against an innocent entity, then it follows that they could lie against any other entity, innocent entity. That includes not only all the population in the demography in Little England, but in the whole of the UK and beyond. So it affects justice, which is not confined to one unjustly target like the baby angel Geronimo. But it affects the rights, the entitlements, and the claim to universal justice by anybody, any innocent person or party. That is why it's so important. It's important even if the assessment is limited to the rights and entitlements of baby angel Geronimo, the most innocent being on the planet Earth, in the context of these diagnoses. But it also extends to every other innocent person, party, or thing. Let's take the kind of narration to the one case of a human child who was being allegedly treated by the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. And the parents were residents of Newham in East London. Now, what the so-called experts, the specialists and the doctors said about the child, it was a child suffering from very serious complications, etc. They said, the experts so-called said that the child should be murdered. Of course, they didn't use the term murder, but that's what they were meaning by the disguised expressions. Luckily for the child, both of our parents were able to see that the experts were wrong. They were absolutely murderously wrong about their child. who both the parents defended very successfully. But that defense didn't take place as a one-off encounter or meeting. It involved the entire life of these two parents. They have to give up everything in order to take on these murderous Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel experts. And that include, of course, that did include taking the case to the relevant courts that were available in London. And the courts, after a series of court and legal kind of confrontations and challenges, the court did agree to allow the parents to take the child out of the UK entirely. Because the evidence that the parents were able to produce before the court in England included the evidence from experts in Italy. Based on the condition of the child and the complications and the details, they were able to say that the experts in Whitechapel, Royal London Hospital, were wrong, and that the child's condition could be treated and was treatable, which is what happened. Now, imagine you cannot have such a recourse to another set of experts in another country altogether. What happens? That a life can be really destroyed by the lies of the UK experts. And that is one of the things that, so far as we know at this stage, as we broadcast this particular edition at 10:50 hours GMT, a similar kind of approach could have been made by seeking experts' opinion on the state of the exchanges between baby angel Geronimo, let's say, with his law-breaking, wrongdoing, evil-doing plotters against him and against freedom, against his freedom at depraved Defra. So this is something that should be, we believe and we assert, should be tested and tried. Not just in another country, but in more than one country, including Western Europe and in other parts of the world. What we're saying is that that should be done as part of the campaign for justice for the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. None of the papers, let's look at the papers, the shape of them today. This is the Beaverbrook legacy, the Canadian criminal called Beaverbrook, who played the role of peddling for Winston Churchill, who rewarded him with a cabinet position, but the Daily Express lied for Churchill, lied for the agenda, the narrative of Churchill. And this is the financial crimes, we call it financial crimes, and I'll come to recap on that in a minute. This is edited by a woman born as a Muslim in the Lebanon called Rola Khalaf. Rola Khalaf does not respect the evidence, the experience of the people of the Lebanon in the way that the financial crimes is, quote, edited. She calls it, the financial crimes, the capitalist Bible. And this is what capitalism does. This is a confession on the front page of The Guardian, and it is not the first day. As they said, this is the second day of the Pandora Papers revelation. This is the tip of the iceberg. That is to say, that trillions and trillions and trillions of pounds and dollars are hidden by gangs of criminals. And gangs of criminals are current incumbents in posts as heads of state or heads of governments in Africa, in Western Europe, in Russia, and elsewhere. Now imagine the amount of money that they are stealing and hiding in the context of the services that they are robbing, denying the people in the particular demographies of, for example, the entirety of the row, so-called raising of the taxes row, engulfing the so-called conservatives. That kind of row, that kind of raising of the taxes, which actually has been aimed at penalizing the poorest in the many in the country, in the UK. That kind of penalty would not have been necessary if the stolen money and the hidden money were not stolen and were actually put in the disposal, at the disposal of the quote public, that is the treasury, the government, to share with the people in need. That's the importance. That's the importance of emphasizing the duty the Fleet Street has, the media has, to tell the truth, to investigate. Now, this Pandora paper wasn't an investigation that was initiated by The Guardian, nor was the previous investigations about offshore concealment of funding. And even though The Guardian has that on the front page, the main item on the Daily Star is about the climate change protesters. Now, there are two aspects of that particular story. The protesters, one of the protesters has been quoted both by the Scum and the Mail and the Daily Star and others who are condemning them over the blockades that the so-called protesters created at the Blackwall Tunnel in Poplar in the east end of London, in Tower Hamlets, and in Wandsworth and another part of the capital. Now, first of all, the way that these people have been quoted, I'm not saying that is exactly what they have said, but that is how they've been quoted, paints them as not only not genuinely campaigning against genuine climate change events, but that they are being painted as, in our view, as also provocateurs. That is to say, they are agents of the government, agents of big business that have been deployed in order to discredit genuine protests. How do they discredit? Because they are being quoted as saying that they, the protesters, don't care about highly, seriously ill patients being transported through the tunnel, let's say, or the motorway or whatever, to the places, hospital or other places for care. They said that they will They will block 999 kind of call responders, and they will allow patients to die. Now that is completely perverse. How can that be at any level acceptable? And so they are discrediting the campaign or the cause. And that is why they are also provocateurs. They are acting for the big business and not for the cause. Here is the Daily Scar on pages 4 and 5, where one of the alleged leaders of the campaign, a man called Roger Hallam, has been photographed and is being quoted in big letters saying, "I would block ambulance and dying patient." How dare he? I mean, it defies all common sense, this criminal. And that's the lowest of the law. And there is no way that the cause of campaigning, genuinely campaigning for climate change difference, is anything to do with this organized criminals or the provocateur. And the contempt shown by depraved DEFRA against the innocent baby angel Geronimo in the last 4 years, the contempt warrants DEFRA personnel, decision-making criminals, to be given the sack, then prosecuted and be put away for the rest of their natural lives. In order to achieve that kind of token display of justice for the targets of the depraved DEFRA lies and lying, campaigns need to be organized. Campaigns need to be held, and the campaigns have not been organized. And we are continuing this daily diagnostic delivery of evidence in order to aid and support the actual organizing of the campaign for justice for baby angel Geronimo. As I said, not just for baby angel Geronimo, for other victims, other targets of lies by depraved DEFRA. And we said this also as part of the campaign, evidential campaign, for sacking Boris Johnson from the post and for prosecuting Boris Johnson for the crimes against justice that he has been party to, and for the inclusion of Keir Starmer and West Streeting and other criminals as part of the ethical, moral, universal constitutional rights for justice. Rights for the justice denied targets of lying and plots and criminality, hatched via the depraved DEFRA and retailed via the depraved DEFRA and condoned by the criminal, congenital criminal liar, Boris Johnson. I mean, the ex-French ambassador, Sylvie Berman, who used the phrase congenital liar against Boris Johnson, about Boris Johnson. Of course, she remains diplomatic in her expressions based on the evidence of the congenital liar Boris Johnson's behavior. But the number of times that Boris Johnson has done wrong, has done evil, and has condoned evil and been complicit with evil, justify a more detailed description of Boris Johnson than the two words congenital liar actually represent. When I covered, if you like, as a journalist, the various events that were addressed by Tony Benn, I noticed the complete pathetic, pretentious persona that Tony Benn put on. And I'm saying this at this time, and I'm inviting anyone watching this to communicate in a direct message if they disagree with what I'm saying on the facts, only on the facts. I noticed that the image of Tony Benn that had been kind of built up over the previous years was complete lie, because the guy was absolutely shamelessly operating on the assumption that any of the audience, either directly, personally in front of him, or any audience members that were likely to see him or watch him on a video, were able to see through his lying. For example, this lie I'm going to kind of diagnose and dissect right here. Tony Benn never met M.K. Gandhi while Gandhi was in his prime. Even if he met him, he must have seen him at the most. So, when Gandhi was apparently asked a question, what he thought of Western civilization or British civilization or something like that, Gandhi reportedly answered that it would be a good idea, meaning that there was no such thing as Western civilization or British civilization. So, long time after Gandhi had been murdered, more than 60 years after Gandhi was assassinated, Tony Benn, a British politico, invoked Gandhi about that and invented a whole series of words that were intentionally scripted by Benn himself, so that he, Benn, could come across as having been somebody who knew M.K. Gandhi personally, and he knew M.K. Gandhi's philosophy personally. That is not true, because at no stage did Tony Benn condemn empire, really. At no stage did he condemn the imperialists of the Labour Party, the imperialists of the other parties, and at no time, at no point, on no occasion did Tony Benn recognize the intellectual equals or intellectual superiors to himself that came from the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever. Tony Benn operated as a racist imperialist, just like Pol Pot did. To them, British values remained higher than the values of the colonized countries of Africa and Asia. And throughout his career as a, quote, socialist leader, socialist activist, socialist campaigner, Tony Benn benefited from the multi-million family fortune that he inherited. And he didn't condemn. He didn't condemn that type of inheritance. And Benn didn't condemn capitalism. And Benn didn't disown capitalism. What Benn did was, after his father, who was a member of the House of Peers, called Viscount Stansgate, after his father passed away, Tony Benn found that if he remained a hereditary peer, inheriting his father's peerage, if he remained a member of the House of Peers, then he would not be able to promote his career as a leader of the Labour Party, for which he had to be a member of Parliament. And while he was a member of the Peers, he couldn't at the same time be a member of Parliament. So what did Tony Benn do? Tony Benn came up with the crafty idea that he would make a speech or series of speeches condemning the peerage. And so he applied to be stripped of the peerage so that he could become a candidate for election as a member of Parliament. So Tony Benn confected a series of untruths, myths about him, his politics. And eventually he succeeded in getting out of the peerage and became a member of Parliament and became elected. And he continued to get elected for several elections. What none of the people, his so-called followers, the fan club, just like the Corbynites now, and I'll come to the Corbynites in a minute, what none of the fan club of Tony Benn pointed out or admitted or noticed or shared their knowledge of noticing is the fact that Tony Benn didn't end his link to the House of Peers. Because currently, as I speak now, on 5th of October 2021, his elder son, Stephen, is the current Viscount in the House of Peers, the Viscount that his father's father had been and his father had been. This happened after Tony Benn himself died, and his death revived the existence of the Viscount Stansgate. What am I saying? I'm saying that the most self-promoting socialist in the Labour Party during the 20th century, Tony Benn, is exposed as a phony. So phony Benn, I call him. Look at the role that Corbyn, one of Tony Benn's fan club members at the time in the 1980s and 90s. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn colluded with Boris Johnson, who plotted the December 2019 election, and Johnson was only able to hold the 2019 election because of Corbyn's collusion and complicity with the Conservative scum. And the main reason why Corbyn colluded with the Conservatives was to let Brexit get done. And Brexit got done. And this country has got undone by that, which is what the French diplomat for several years in the UK, in her book, described as Britain getting scuttled, or Britain choosing to get scuttled. What is getting scuttled? Now, Sylvie Agnes Berman, who is 68 years old, I think, and she lives in Kensington. That is how she is described as in the wiki entry. And she is an experienced French diplomat. So the wiki doesn't really deal with the congenital liar. I will come to that. Okay, so the interview that she gave to the Times, Saturday interview, published online on the 27th of February 2021, and it's written by somebody called Charles Bremner. who writes in the edited form that the item appears online. It's not every day that the ambassador of one of Britain's closest allies calls the Prime Minister a congenital liar. Sylvie Berman, who was until 2017 France's envoy at the court of St. James's. Now, that is the diplomatic phrase used for the diplomatic posting in the United Kingdom. Sylvie Berman is amused by the fuss in London over her portrait of Boris Johnson as a clever but reckless opportunist with no regard for the truth. Now, if we just stop there, then we can understand, we can relate straight with the behavior of the depraved DEFRA against the baby angel Geronimo. Because Johnson has no regard for the truth. That's what Johnson has done, has been doing in condoning the lies against Boris baby angel Geronimo, perpetrated and touted and issued via the depraved DEFRA against baby angel Geronimo. That has been going on for the last 4 years. So Sylvie Berman wrote in her new book, Goodbye Britannia, that Boris Johnson tells lies to embellish reality. He lies as a game, but also as an instrument of power. Now he embellishes the truth, which is what he has done against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. Now, judging by the three so-called judges who agreed to serve as rubber stamps for the depraved DEFRA in the three separate cases, that were kind of formally presented or put before three separate judges, Murphy, Griffiths, and so far the latest one, Stacey. Murphy, Griffiths, and Stacey all behaved against the due process, against the rule of law, against the duties as so-called independent members of the judiciary. And all these three judges, so-called, abused their position, and they chose to misconduct themselves in order to put on the record the lies confected by a DEFRA, the depraved DEFRA, against the baby angel, the most innocent baby angel Geronimo, and put on the record those lies as the truth. And the trigger, the core trigger, the core kind of justification for those lies as being put on the record as the truth was the fact that the lies were uttered, put on the record by the three separately sitting rubber stamps, also known as the judges. So when each of these liars perpetrated the lie against the baby angel Geronimo, each time the option came into existence for baby angel Geronimo to appeal against the lying behavior and misconduct on a platform that wasn't obstructed against baby Angel Geronimo's rights to seek justice against these criminals each time. And that can only have been on a platform internationally outside of the UK. Because the UK judiciary is a corrupt, criminally obstructive, wrongdoing judiciary, which operates as an extension of the rubber stamp kind of agenda needed by the relevant incumbent regime, also known as the government. Now, Fleet Street, not just today's Fleet Street papers, which I shall hold before the camera. These are the papers today. Not just today, but Fleet Street in the last 100 years, 200 years, whatever the actual kind of constituents, the only constituents for the last 200 years really has been the Times, the title Times. And now the Guardian is saying that it has been around for 200 years. It has been around for 200 years if we include the Manchester Guardian. And all the others are later. Whatever the number of Fleet Street papers over the last 230 years, 200 years, the role of the Fleet Street papers has been to tell lies, to hide the truth, to collude with the government of the day, so-called, and to support empire, support racism, support attacks on women, and support the attackers of justice. 200 years. That is what Fleet Street has been doing and does do. And that, I am saying, is despite the fact that the Guardian pretentiously claims to be disclosing this information. The Guardian leaves out the role of the judiciary. Why? Because this kind of wanton, brazen corruption by British, there is the picture of Johnson who is the recipient of the bribe. And we have been saying that the bribery of Johnson by the group called the Daily Telegraph is well known. And the bribery of Boris Johnson is a crime, because Johnson does not deserve the millions of pounds that he has been personally given by the bribing the Daily, bribing Boris Johnson graph. None of the pieces that Johnson was allegedly paid for writing contains anything. None of the pieces that Johnson has apparently been paid millions of pounds over the last 12 years or so actually contains anything that can be justifiably used as the reason for his being paid so much money by the owners of the Daily Boris Graf group, Daily Bribing Boris Graf group. So there is no kind of call by the Guardian for Boris Johnson, a serial offender, a serial participant in serial offenses, to subvert democracy, to subvert public accountability. None of these things have been or has been done in the quiet. It has been done quite publicly. And the Guardian has not carried out an investigation demanding, let alone achieving, the holding of serial criminals to account and for stopping these serial criminals from being allowed to seek electorally achieved public office in power. Going back to Corbyn, who conspired with Boris Johnson as part of the Brexit agenda to hold that December 2019 general election in the UK, Corbyn knew that Brexit would be undone, that Brexit would be defeated despite the referendum if it was not pushed through the Commons or Parliament. And it could not be pushed through the Parliament without a strong majority, which is what has happened. Brexit has been put through, but Brexit has been done, but Brexit has undone Britain. Just like the depraved DEFRA has undone the targets of its lying, and the targets of depraved DEFRA lying do not just contain baby angel Geronimo, but other targets. So what has been quite obvious to the targets of the DEFRA lies and untruth and defamation has been kind of hidden by the agents and spies and operatives and infiltrators working for depraved DEFRA around various areas of objection to the DEFRA lies and liars. So we don't know at this stage, as we have said before in previous editions, we don't know the details of the exchanges of communications between the depraved DEFRA and their targets. In the context of these broadcasts, the only target we know personally is baby angel Geronimo. And we believe that when made public, all the evidence-based kind of communications that Boris Johnson was made aware of as having been contained in the fullest communications between baby angel Geronimo and the depraved DEFRA. All of those show, or will show when they're public, that DEFRA has been lying, has been lying at every stage. So this is the proof that DEFRA is in the darkness Deborah is the evildoer, and Deborah is the lying, wrongdoer outfit. And every single platform, every single aspect of the kind of state has allowed the depraved Deborah to carry on lying against the baby angel Geronimo. Despite the fact that each of these agencies had been or has been made very aware of the fact that Deborah was lying and has been lying. And depraved Deborah is depraved and does tell nothing but the lies it in fact inflicts on the most innocent targets. Now, this son of the Rifkind, the Scottish-born conservative scum who was a cabinet minister. Now, this Rifkind is given a column by the Times, Rupert Murdoch, because of the name. Most of the children of this scum are given platforms by the Fleet Street criminals. And Hugo Rifkind is one. But such are the dire truths about the lies being perpetrated by depraved Defra, by the congenital liar Boris Johnson, that even the likes of Hugo Rifkind are forced to admit that these are liars. Now, of course, they are not saying liars in the sense that I'm saying it. But here is the read of the heading on page 25 of the Times today. Who will do the jobs that nobody wants? And then subheading is, these disruptions aren't just about pigs, petrol, and power. It's a rude awakening about how our whole economy works. Now, it doesn't work. The economy doesn't work. That is the point. And the best, most appropriate word there, instead of works, would be operates. So that would cover the various stages of dysfunction, which the word work doesn't cover. It brazenly asserts that it does work. It doesn't make any concession to the fact that various stages of dysfunction and lying are occurring. Now, here is the taste of the Hugo Rifkind piece in the Times. And being a son of a Rifkind, this idiot is not coming to the point. It is so disgustingly, unbearably unreadable that I'm not going to read it. And that is the point. Fleet Street is a street of lies. Although the headline is theirs, almost there, he doesn't actually condemn Johnson, he peddles Johnson. And thereby he keeps his career, as far as that is concerned. So Fleet Street is not auditing the behavior of the depraved DEFRA, nor the behavior of the courts of criminals called judges, nor the behavior of the Ministry of Injustice, nor the behavior of the members of parliament who allegedly sit on the DEFRA Select Committee. And the murder scum is this Times is stuffed full of criminal liars, collectively and individually, constituting scum that Angela Rayner have woken up to. This is a picture of this on page 23. This is a picture in the piece headed "Localism is the Key to Leveling Up Britain," byline to William Hague. And there is a picture of Keith Joseph going with this piece. And the caption underneath the Keith Joseph photograph reads, "Sir Keith Joseph provided much of the ministerial heft for Thatcherism." Now, it's not just the ministerial heft for Thatcherism. He did a lot more. Even before he got into any position to assert any ministerial heft for Thatcherism, he was very active, Keith Joseph, on the kind of platform sidelining, shadowing the government that was fronted by Wilson. And he continued to do that when Wilson resigned in 1976, followed by the most corrupt, ignorant, stupid, racist leader of the Labour Party called James Callaghan. Well, I don't use the pronunciation Callahan, because I use the pronunciation as I find the spelling, which is Callaghan. In October, this is October 2001, so in October 1976, there was a conference of the National Union of Students held in Blackpool. And I was there. That is almost 45 years ago. And at one point, during the proceedings of the National Union of Students, which was routinely condemned by the Fleet Street papers as being ultra left wing. It never was. But that's the history, that's the record of the Fleet Street of lies. Anyway, at one point of the proceedings, my attention was drawn to the appearance on the balcony of the conference hall of Keith Joseph. Now, Joseph was not invited there. He just appeared there, and he was sitting there with two cons belonging to the Federation of Conservative Youth or students. Two of them were from Scotland. One was called Moon, and my role there was to, as a journalist, as a reporter, I was recording on a still camera the events, and I pictured Keith Joseph sitting next to Moon, and at one stage, within a few seconds, I noticed that the SWB, there is a swear word, I'm not going to pronounce it, SWP, and others arrived on the balcony just next to me and were kind of noisily shouting at Keith Joseph. And the incumbent in the post of secretary of the NUS at that time was the mental slave, Trevor Terrible P-Lips, who surfaced on the balcony himself, and who was among the people involved in physically pushing the SWP lot out of this space and into the main street. I had that picture as well. I took the picture of Trevor Terrible P-Lips. The essential point that the mental slave Trevor Terrible P-Lips was making, and he was the only one who was trying to make a point in defense of Keith Joseph being there, which is the very thing that the SWP were opposing. Now, Trevor Terrible P-Lips is a liar. He was making up a whole scenario that the SWP, objecting to the presence of Keith Joseph, did not make. SWP were calling Keith Joseph various names, not giving analysis. But Trevor Terrible P-Lips at that stage in Blackpool was making up a lie and slogan that the SWP were against free speech. The SWP were not against free speech. They were objecting to the ideological lies that Keith Joseph represented. So the mental slave SWP, hating Trevor Terrible P-Lips, got it wrong there. The SWP lot were not breaking the law. They are not objecting to free speech whatsoever. They're objecting to the contents of the ideology that Keith Joseph represented. So years later, he became Margaret Thatcher's cabinet member concerned. It wasn't at the time, he wasn't in the cabinet because the 1979 election was at least 3 years away at the time that I witnessed and recorded all these activities. Now, if what I saw was what the scum was about, then of course, William Hague is a absolutely deranged liar. Because what Hague is saying here is that localism is the key to leveling up Britain. That is an absolute lie. What he's saying is giving a publicity platform to the idea of having more elected mayors for the regions. Now, there is no evidence in anything that any elected mayor post holder has done anywhere that it creates a positive benefit for the local community concerned. Nor will it ever produce any benefit, any positive benefit for the community concerned. We shall be, of course, talking more about this in the next editions. There is a lot to talk about.